So we're here with Gala Díaz Langou. She is the executive director of CIPPEC. CIPPEC is, I think, one of the best known think tanks in Latin America. Certainly, it is known around the world. And we've known Gala for a very long time. And so I'm delighted to have a chance to talk to you, Gala, about your role as executive director, but also about your career and your views about think tanks and how think tanks have changed, not just in Argentina, but about think tanks in the wider world, and their evolution over the last few years. I was going to say over the last 20 years of CIPPEC, but you've been around in CIPPEC for not 20 years, but 15 years. Yes, almost a lifetime of the think tank. So Gala, let's start with a few sort of desert island type questions.
Okay.
So besides CIPPEC, what three other think tanks do you see as your references?
Well, Brookings for sure. Bruegel also. I think it has an interesting way of approaching different audiences, and Fundación Getúlio Vargas also in Brazil. Those are, I believe, three sustainable big think tanks which can be role models for CIPPEC, but mostly because of the impact they have in policy.
Okay. And assuming that being the executive director of a think tank is, as Simon Maxwell says, the best job in the world, but also an impossible job, what other role in a think tank would you go back to? When or in what position did you have the most fun?
Well, that is a difficult question. I believe I had fun in every position I had at CIPPEC. I mean, you can call CIPPEC anything but dull. You can have fun everywhere, and well, the context also of policy and public policy in Argentina makes it something at least challenging to grow to.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think I would be happy to go back to every role, but particularly to the role of program director. The last couple of years, 5 years, I was the program director of social protection at CIPPEC, and there I had the possibility to bring forward ideas and see them concretely turn into projects and reality. So I believe to have that chance was very exhilarating in a way.
Great. And do you have any role models as executive director?
Well, I've learned something, at least from every executive director that CIPPEC has had in the past. Nicolás Ducoté, Miguel Brown, Fernando Strafase, and obviously Julia Pomares taught me different things, and I believe they also made CIPPEC what it is today. But I also look up to other executive directors from other think tanks in the world. I don't want to name names because people will be left out, obviously, but I try to interact a lot with other think tankers. I believe that we do have a lot to learn, and well, on think tanks is an excellent platform to do that.
Thanks. And so when you're not think tanking, where could we find you?
Well, now I'm think tanking from, well, not today, but mostly every other day from home. And I'm always at home because, quarantine. But if I'm not at home, I'm probably running. I go for a run almost daily at the Lake Regatas in Buenos Aires city, where I live.
Great, thanks. Nice to see that you have a life outside of the think tank world. I think we all need it, and I am sure you'll have fun in this new role. As you say, Argentinian politics, like most politics, are anything but dull, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's get into the questions about your role as the director. I mean, Gala, you started in CIPPEC. And now you are running CIPPEC. Can you tell us a little bit about your career? How do you get to that position of executive director?
Well, yeah, I started working at CIPPEC when I was 22 years old, and I had just graduated from university. And I was an assistant at one of the programs that work on policy influence, civil society policy influence at CIPPEC, which doesn't exist anymore. Then that program sort of shifted towards a more social look of public policy, and finally in 2008 we created the social protection program, where I was an analyst. I had a promotion there. And then I grew within the social protection program. I was project coordinator in charge of research projects. Then I was program coordinator, that it takes on the whole agenda of the program. And then in 2016, I became the director of the social protection program. I also had other roles within CIPPEC. I was one of the first members of the ethics committee back in 2007, and then I had the opportunity as a member of the executive committee, which is the main governance committee at CIPPEC, to participate in the drafting of the new ethics code, which was also a very interesting project. And I'm also a member of the project analysis committee, which is where we put forward the proposals that CIPPEC will ultimately take on and turn into projects. I learned a lot in all these different roles, and it's been my whole professional career, CIPPEC, but also in a way my school, you know, in order to acquire all the abilities that I need today.
What do you think are those lessons? You know, those key lessons that you're glad you went to, you attended, you paid attention to, because you think you haven't done the role yet, you haven't gone through the motions of being an ED, but that you think are going to help you for sure to take on this challenge.
Well, I think the main one is to pay attention to the people. I mean, think tanks are the think tankers. I mean, they are not more nor less than that. So to understand that CIPPEC gathers an exceptional group of people in terms of their professional capacity, but also the human quality. I believe it's important to take on the lead of the whole organization, and to be able also to take it to a different level, and that only can be done by providing the best opportunities to the people who make CIPPEC to fulfill their full potential.
So Gala, what are your plans for CIPPEC?
I believe that today we are in a turning point worldwide, and particularly in Argentina. What will come after this period that we don't know how much it will last will probably be very different from, or at least different from what we saw in the past. And this means that we will have to rethink some of the key issues of our developmental strategy in every country. And these discussions, particularly in Argentina, as happens in many other countries, are happening in a moment of very high restrictions, a very deep crisis with not only the sanitary part of this pandemic, but also the social, the economic, and even the institutional crisis that sometimes come along with this moment. And to be able to think and rethink our developmental strategy in this context might be risky, because we have a lot of restrictions that might leave aside some more optimistic options that we might want for our future. And it is also risky because we're not necessarily thinking about what comes next, what is the medium and the long term. We are so focused in turning out the fire that we have around us that it makes it difficult to look a bit further. And I think that CIPPEC does this to bring the medium and the long term to the current issues, to build those links, to say the decision that we make today about opening or closing schools, for instance, might have an impact in the future, but the other way around, also saying we need to reform how we provide secondary education in Argentina to bring those debates to the present and say we need to do this now, because if not, in 10 years we'll have a much greater problem. So I think CIPPEC needs to do that, and in a way that CIPPEC usually does it, which is in a very plural way, not only with the whole political spectrum, but also involving other actors, unions, private sector, social movements, media, etc. Doing so in a systemic matter, understanding the trade-offs between different sectors, that they're not isolated policy issues, but everything is interdependent. And also trying to learn from what other countries are going through and from what is being debated in international fora. I think that that liaison between the domestic and the international spheres is also a role that CIPPEC has done in the past and should continue to do and to strengthen it.
And do you see CIPPEC changing over the next 5 years? I mean, as an organization, I think you're still based near Congreso, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the office I know. I mean, do you? I mean, I don't know the office anymore, so I'm sure it's changed from within. But do you see the organization changing, moving, growing, staying the same? Do you think there'll be new skills coming in over the next 5 years? I remember a very young CIPPEC. We're not young anymore, I guess. But do you think it'll continue to be a young organization? What are the? I mean, these are maybe a bit boring questions in terms of not the political economy of Argentina, but more about the inside of the organization.
It is. I mean, for sure, I think that CIPPEC will change. I mean, the context will force us to, but I also think it is the right thing to do. It would be. I don't think it would be appropriate for us to say we need to do things differently for Argentina and for us to continue to do the same things over and over. There are some issues that have changed since the beginning. I mean, CIPPEC is still a young organization. I believe that most of our staff is under 55 years old, and I believe that 60% or so has 35 years or less. But we have grown in seniority in terms of incorporating researchers that have had experiences and have had like trajectories that can provide different inputs and views of what needs to be done in Argentina. And I believe that is a good thing to do and to continue to do. But we also need to maintain like the innovation aspect of it in terms of how we think about policy and how we do our work to think about policy. And that means involving technology for once. Julia has done some steps forward in that direction, and I intend to continue. I believe that we have a huge potential in the impact of technology in the workforce as more generally, but particularly in how we think about policy, how we analyze policy. At least in Argentina, there's an underuse of technology that can be turned. And also, CIPPEC is organized in 3 large areas, which are social development, economic development, and institutional. And within those areas, we have programs. There are some transversal programs or projects that involve different areas, but most of the projects are very sectorial. And I believe we need to start to think that differently, to create more dialogue within the different areas. Obviously, it is great to have different specialities and different expertise according to the sectors, but we need to generate more dialogue within them, and also in the way that the other part of the institution, which are the institutional areas, the ones that provide support, communications, institutional development, administration, management, and public businesses, how they interact with the programs and the projects, and in a more agile manner than what we do now. Obviously, it means to bring more talent to CIPPEC, hopefully to have a stronger organization, a more innovative organization, but also with what we have today, to make some small changes, to go gradually to a more efficient model, maybe.
Great. And let me ask you a final question specifically about CIPPEC. One of the things I remember about CIPPEC is that when we first started working together 15 years ago, CIPPEC was very focused on Argentina, right? The mandate was work in Argentina. And then over time, it's begun to play a bigger role regionally. And around the G20, CIPPEC became a name known around the world. And I think that has continued. I've seen you do some work with think tanks, from Europe. You've been engaging in global debates. And this pandemic has created a bit of a weird situation where we're all disconnected. Our audiences are now global, right? And over the last year, I've been consuming research, analysis, and opinion from CIPPEC, and often tweeting it to my audiences, quote unquote, here in Peru, saying, we should be having those debates here. Do you see CIPPEC growing in that international sort of line, or are you concerned, or are you sort of worried about keeping a stronghold in Argentina, or both? You might just have CIPPEC might be a household name globally as well as locally.
Yeah, I think they are compatible, both things, and I think they reinforce each other in a very somehow counterintuitive way. CIPPEC has indeed grown, mostly in the last decade of its history in the international arena, thanks to a role in the T20 for sure, in the Think 20, which is the think tank group of the G20, but also in other networks and in other fora. I believe there is still place to grow, at least in three concrete spaces. One is other international fora aside from the G20, and to bring some of those debates to the domestic arena, but also to inform those international debates with our reality, which tends to be different to some of the most maybe hegemonic views that are stated in those realms. The second one is in South collaboration networks, such as Southern Voice or other spaces, Latin American networks mostly. And I believe that we have a lot to learn from each other, and that we have a lot of disconnection also, in terms of not being able to learn from other countries' experiences that have already done what we are trying to do. So I believe that there's a space there to grow. And thirdly, in terms of the concrete policies, and mostly in terms of governmental allegiances between CIPPEC and concrete governments, where we can maybe provide technical assistance or learn from other countries' experiences. We have done so in the past, for instance, with the Sistema Nacional de Cuidados, the care system of Uruguay, or the Brasil Sin Miseria, the Brazilian strategy during Dilma's presidency to fight extreme poverty, and to bring home those lessons and to inform policy. I believe that we try to inform policy in Argentina based and having in mind those experiences. Our recommendations will be much better than without them. So I think that's why one thing reinforces the other.
So now let's move to biggest challenges think tanks face right now generally. I mean, what do you think are those big challenges wherever we are? What do you think think tanks need to worry about today?
My mind automatically goes to uncertainty, but I don't think that is a challenge for think tanks, because we that is what we do, I think, to try to make less uncertain realities. That is what we almost always done, and what we should do now is do that in a greater extent, because the uncertainty has grown for sure. But I think the greatest challenge for us think tanks to do our work is the anti-rights movements that have a very strong linkage to not basing public discussions and policy making, particularly in evidence. And since think tanks try to build that bridge between evidence and policy making, and bringing forth some issues to the public debate that are based on concrete data and rigorous research, I believe there is a risk there to have that is the pillar of the legitimacy of think tanks eroded. And I believe that those kind of movements that are present in most every country are for sure a risk that we should take seriously, and we should take concrete action.
And by anti-rights, you mean sort of groups of individuals who sort of fight against human rights, against the rights of minorities. Is that what you mean?
Yes, but there's also this certain alignment between those groups that go from anti-rights in terms of women's rights, but also anti-vaccines, with more of also a nationalistic approach to policy, with also more of a closing the international markets, with more of a right spectrum political parties that tend to close frontiers, to go against migration, and most of those movements, from my point of view, are also not as eager to incorporate evidence in their debates.
That's interesting. I mean, to complicate things even more, for instance, in Peru, we have right now a very heated second round for presidential elections, and both candidates on the left, on the extreme left, and possibly on the extreme right, are quite conservative when it comes to more sort of anti-women's rights and rights of minorities. They are anti-immigration. They're both claiming that we should throw away the Venezuelan. They're anti the lockdowns, not so much anti-vaccines, but anti-lockdowns. Although they have, some of them have criticized the vaccines we're using, but I think it's more of a political move. So the alliance between the anti-rights and the right is can be added by joining some forces with the radical left, I guess, in this case. But I see your point that it's a strong combination of a value-based arguments with an anti-evidence based argument, which is appealing to people.
And I completely agree with your point that the extreme right touches with the extreme left in these issues. I mean, it is a way of cross-cutting the maybe traditional political spectrum that is particularly risky for think tanks. Yeah.
What roles can think tanks play in this context? What is the role of a think tank? A think tank like CIPPEC, but also other think tanks, because you'll find think tanks not on the extremes maybe, but you'll find think tanks center to right, center to left.
I think that, this is probably the greatest challenge, and it is because there is no easy answer to the question of what to do about it. I think that emphasizing the need to base our policies with evidence, and that is the way to having a greater impact and to ultimately have a greater improvement in people's quality of life, is the way of saying also that this is the scientific method in a way translated to how we do policy, and this is how humanity has got to where it is, for good and for bad. But I think we should be probably thinking outside the box. I mean, many of this is happening in social networks, in other spaces that are not the traditional places where think tanks talk or where think tanks grow. And we need to engage more and mostly more effectively into those debates. And this means to speak with people with whom we're not used to speaking, engaging in those debates and providing arguments and trying to put forward those discussions. And I know it's risky strategy because it might turn into a boomerang and come back, but I don't see any other way than to try to think and make other people think their minds than to engaging in a constructive dialogue with them.
Yeah, I mean, I see the risk as well, because if you, I mean, you have to accept. I mean, you can't keep throwing evidence at the problem, right? You have to engage. You have to accept that the problem is a problem because it's mixed with values, it's mixed with misinformation, it's mixed with interest. And you've got to address all of them, and you are addressing them from a non-neutral standpoint, where you're bringing your values to that issue, to that discussion, and that's going to alienate some people for sure, right? You're not going to be able to, be liked by everybody. So that's one problem, is that many think tanks don't often present their values. They don't show their cards, right? They say, well, we're neutral because we're evidence-based, but they're not.
Yeah, no, nothing is neutral.
But showing your values is hard. I mean, do you think CIPPEC does this rather well? I mean, I think I've seen your work, and you take a sort of a position on issues related to social protection aspects. Paternal leave. I remember you guys had a campaign looking at, and that is taking a stance on values, right? It's not just evidence-based. It's also saying this matters. This is important. This is part of our values as a society. Do you have other examples of that?
Yes, during 2019 for the presidential election here in Argentina, we had a large institutional project which was called META, which stands for goals, strategic goals to transform Argentina, or something like that. It's an acronym. And within that project, we had different issues. And in every issue, what we did was we produced a synthesis of our research, and then we took that and discussed it with different audiences, with the private sector, with the unions, with the media, and depending on the topic, some of those discussions were with these different actors sitting in the same table, some were more bilateral. But what we did after that was try to systematize in a way where were the consensus, and also where were no consensus, and where were those different strategies, and which were the pros and cons in a certain way of each of the different solutions that were presented by those actors. And then we argued for what we thought was the best one. And having that path done made clear that you had different criteria. I mean, the different solutions are because we had different criteria, not because one is wrong and the other one is right. So what we tried to do in the final section of those documents was try to emphasize what we thought was the best set of criteria according to a set of values, obviously, which was universality, trying to get to a fairer share of what we done in education, in I don't know, economic development, in different issues. But that way of thinking through a specific policy issue was useful in order to make more transparent how we backed the proposals we put forward.
And to address another one of the challenges you raised, which is reaching completely new audiences. Because you've mentioned you talk to unions, the private sector, government. Those are audiences that know you. Those are audiences
They're not new.
they see CIPPEC and they say, oh yes, okay, these guys, they know what they're talking about. Let's go to that meeting. Let's have a conversation. But new audiences, as much as CIPPEC is well known, it's probably not known by those audiences, right? The people, the street, young people, new generations. They'll probably come across CIPPEC if they join a government body, if they join an NGO, if they pursue that career path, right? But most of them will never know, and those are the people you want to reach. How do think tanks build credibility, vis-a-vis people, groups of people who are not engaging in the world of think tanking and policy research at all, right? And are going to follow an Instagrammer or a TikToker, because they relate to them, right? They say, oh, they live nearby, or they live a life that I like to live. How do you bridge that divide?
I don't know. It is something that we are
trying to address that. We need to.
Yeah, we're trying to address. We have this huge new project because in 2023, Argentina will turn 40 years of uninterrupted democracy for the first time. So we are launching a large project targeted on thinking what we've done over the past 40 years, but not to make a balance of the historical reasons why we are as we are, but mostly to learn and to define what we want for the next 40 years of our country. And in that process, we want to involve a lot the younger generations, because it will be them who will have to manage the country in the next 40 years of democracy. And we are thinking about different strategies. We have like a long list of what we could do. We haven't tried any of them yet. I believe that the virtuality of the current moment can be an important opportunity also in a large and federal country as Argentina to reach new audiences, but it is not automatic. We need to probably do many things that complement each other in order to reach them. And we'll try and we'll share, but now I don't know.
Well, do keep us posted on that project. I think that's a great idea, and I'd love to hear more about it as it develops. So let me ask you now a kind of final question. If your grandchildren or grandnephews and nieces ever join CIPPEC, what do you think CIPPEC will be like, or other think tanks for that matter?
Wow. That is an important question. The first place my mind goes to was to think that I hope CIPPEC isn't necessary when my grandchildren will be able to work, because policy will already be so fluid that and effective that we wouldn't need anything like to input those processes. That probably won't be the case. So I believe that. I hope CIPPEC still stands by then, and it's a stronger organization, not in terms of its size or its budget or anything, but in terms of its impact, how we do things, how we concretely inform policy, and how we help thinking the developmental strategy. I believe that there is a risk also in staying focused in more like sectorial specific policies and not seeing the larger picture of what the country needs in terms of its developmental strategy. And I believe CIPPEC can have a stronger role in seeing that picture more broadly and to making those links with what we need to do now.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's it's a common thread we're hearing a lot. The emphasis on networks and connections and hubs and spaces. Research, I think we acknowledge that research can be done elsewhere, that the arriving at recommendations might be done by others. As you say, if policymaking is much more fluid, much more open, much more engaging, then maybe the role that the think tank should play is no longer the same, right? It's not telling government what they should do, is maybe creating the connections, making the connection, helping that fluidity, helping that openness, helping those processes be much more a combination of efficient and inclusive, I guess, more democratic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wonder if they even go to CIPPEC, or they will just connect to the cloud and put on some
well,
virtual reality.
Now, today I'm at the office, but I think there's maybe 3 of us here today, and it's the first time I got here in a month or so. So it is already changing, and we will have to adapt to those changes in order to continue growing also.
So just as a parting question, I mean, this is a very mundane, but do you think you will go back to the office at all, or will people just be able to work from different parts of Buenos Aires, of Argentina, of the world? I mean, do you see in a year from now, we talked again, what percentage of your staff do you think will be based at the office in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, globally?
I think we'll have to wait and see and make the adjustments. But what we had discussed at the executive committee for this year, then we couldn't then implement because the second wave got here before we could implement, was to have 1 day per week at the office and 4 days per week at home. And that might shift in a better sanitary scenario to 2 days at the office and 3 days at home. But that would be the greater ratio that we imagined, at least for now. There are many things that are more efficiently done in the virtuality than in the office, but the office is necessary for some other interactions that need to be done in a more friendly manner, and also to enable many of these connections also that we spoke about. It is much easier to go through the hall and meet someone and talk 5 minutes and then go to the other person than to have a schedule, a call, and have Zoom set up. And so I believe it will be a mixture. I hope to have some face-to-face interactions, at least in the near future. But it won't be what we had in the past, that is for sure.
Great. Change. I think think tanks are all about change, and they should change themselves as well. Exactly. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gala. It was a bit of an accidental interview with all these sort of noises, but thank you very much. It was lovely talking to you, and I learned so much already. So I look forward to the next 5 years at Cepek.
Thank you, Kike. My pleasure to be here with you today, and wonderful to speak to you always.